people get really annoyed when they spend sometimes $1 million or more putting together a proposal. A lot of work goes into these proposals. And then for the government just to say, we're not even going to give you any feedback with respect to why you lost.
Welcome to the Optimize Podcast, brought to you by VisibleThread. The Optimize Podcast is your go-to source for expert insights on BD, capture, proposal management, and government contracting. Each series is hosted by an expert in the field, bringing their unique experience and strategies to every episode. We're excited to kick off Series 4 with our new host, Chris Hamm. Chris is the CEO of Fin Acquisitions and former senior executive at GSA's Assisted Acquisition Services, where he oversaw $75 billion in contracts. Now he's bringing that insight to the podcast, exploring the strategies and future of federal contracting. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on wherever you are listening. Now let's join Chris on this episode.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Optimize Podcast by VisibleThread. I'm your host, Chris Hamm, and today I am joined with an incredible guest, Rob Burton. He has been in the GovCon space for a little bit longer than me, and has extensive experience throughout, from working from law firms, working at DCMA, advising, everybody, and did a stint at OFPP, was the deputy administrator there, and has lots of interesting anecdotes. So I want to welcome Rob to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris.
We're going to have a conversation, a couple of different topic areas, but I want to open with something light. So your time in DC, you spent many, many years there. My question for you is, where's the best happy hour? Where's like the after work in your career you swung by, and what's the first place you're like, you know what, I'm going to go hang out at this place?
Oh my gosh, good grief, Chris. Hey, but listen, I want to tell you before I answer that question, I'm a true swamp person. Okay, so I was actually born in Washington. How many people are actually born in Washington? And so I've been here my whole life, except when I went to college and law school. And so you think I would know every place to hang out in DC, right? But I have to tell you, where I take people, especially from outside Washington, is this new Washington hotel, because Hotel W. They have this outdoor bar on the top with this incredible view of Washington. You just cannot beat that. It's really pretty much a high up-end bar now, and it's a beautiful view of Washington. This is where I take anybody visiting Washington. That's where I take them. So that would definitely be the number one spot.
I would have gone with Off the Record at Hey Adam, but
I like it too, but no view.
Yeah, sure. All right, so I gave a quick rundown of your bona fides, but what are you doing right now? Like what's the main job today?
So I'm a partner at Kroll Mooring, which is a big law firm in Washington, D.C. It has the largest government contracts group in the country. So all these people roaming around that know a lot about government contracts. But I'm a bit unusual because I'm not a litigator. I do a lot of government relations type work. So I help clients with their problems. If they have a problem on an existing contract, I try to elevate it as someone higher in the agency to resolve it. I also, unusual for a law firm guy, I help companies market to the government, try to increase their brand and the awareness of their capabilities. The government's important with respect to relationships, just like in the commercial world. Everything's based on relationships. So I try to help companies with those relationships with the federal government. And as you well know, Chris, the government's sort of hard to deal with, and they're not real user-friendly for sure. And then I do this expert witness work for other law firms, again, highly unusual, where I go in as the expert in government contracts and actually testify on behalf of a plaintiff or a defendant on government contracts issues. And that's a lot of fun. I'll probably do that even after I retire from the law firm.
So the connection to the question, I have been on the receiving end of one of those phone calls from you. And usually when I get a phone call, and I've known you for decades, so like it's a friendly phone call, but when I get a phone call from Rob Burton, when I'm inside, I was thinking, this means that there's a possibility that somebody's going to protest. There's if we did something somebody doesn't like.
And I know this guys, Chris, that filed protests.
Yeah. So let me move into that first subject then, on like the nature of protests, and particularly right now, like in 2025 going into 2026. What does the protest landscape look for you under the Trump administration?
So, I don't think it's any secret, Chris. The Trump administration doesn't like protests. Of course, who really does if you're in the government? Who really enjoys protests? There's no question they delay a procurement, dramatically so. And there's all sorts of unpredictability regarding these protests. But the interesting thing about these protests is that they're declining. If you go back all the way to 2016, you'll actually see the number of protests gradually declining, except for there was one aberration in 2023. There was a huge protest regarding the CIO SP4 procurement. 119 protests, right? Anyway, in 2023, the number of protests shot up because of that one procurement. Generally speaking, they're going down fairly dramatically. And they're just a tiny percentage of the number of contracts. It's less than 1% of the number of contracts that government awards. So you wouldn't think it would be a big, but they usually are protests on big procurements. They usually are protests that will hold up major procurements. And that's why the Trump administration in particular dislikes them greatly. They would love to get rid of them, but it's statutory. It's sort of hard to get rid of it without Congress. And guess what, Chris? The group that listens to protests, the General Accountability Office, is owned by Congress. So more than likely, Congress will not shut it down. So I think protests are here to stay. GAO is here to stay, and GAO is sort of the congressional oversight arm, for Congress. They do many things in that regard, where they do oversight over agencies, and protest is just one of their functions. But the Trump administration would love to see some type of disincentive at least. Now, I haven't seen any legislative proposals, though, put forward yet that would seriously change the incentives. But the Trump administration would like to see, hey, if you were a protester and you file a frivolous protest, you're going to have to pay the other guy's legal expenses. The idea that the loser should pay. They would love to have something of that nature to disincentivize frivolous protests. I hate to tell you, but there are some frivolous protests.
Yes,
no question about it.
We have seen a couple of notes recently where there are citations in a protest that are clearly hallucinations from AI. That some company has just randomly, they put it in, and this one came out, and they didn't even bother to check the public record on whether or not this was an actual real citation.
That you bring up a huge point. AI, right? The small businesses don't want to hire these high-priced law firms, and most protests are filed by small businesses. And what do? They use AI to put their protests together. So GAO is getting really annoyed by that, and GAO has threatened sanctions against some of these small businesses that have filed really, really unprofessional bid protests. This is actually a new problem, Chris. With the advancement of AI, you're actually seeing now really sloppy protests. And GAO, I think, will actually take action to somehow disincentivize the filing of those protests.
Yeah, if anybody from GAO or Congress is listening, simple idea. You get one protest that has a hallucination. I'd like to have a timeout. You can't file another protest for 3 months, 6 months. The second protest for another year. To stop the encouraging the use of just the frivolous things that just delay everything.
Right. Totally agree.
Yep.
I think GAO might do something of that nature, Chris.
We'll see. And they gotta meet in order to do that. Congress needs to get back together, but maybe the furlough will be over by the time the budget will be passed by the time this actually airs.
Right.
All right, so let's move on. New topic, second area. I used to work in GSA. GSA used to be a relatively sleepy agency, and then in this administration became a very, very significant agency. Lots of ideas around centralization, procurement consolidation, and then this new strategy called OneGov. And so, you're sitting watching this. Was this shift a surprise, or is this really just the direction of moving back towards being more efficient?
Well, this isn't new. The idea that GSA should have most of the procurements for the federal government. We've pondered this and thought about. And I think in 2007 I rolled out what was called the Strategic Sourcing Initiative. And that was pushing agencies to use GSA more for the purchase of common goods and services. And I got an enormous pushback, Chris, right? This is 2007. Enormous pushbacks from the agencies that, are you kidding? We're not going to have GSA direct procurements. Oh my gosh, they don't know what they're doing over there. So there was a lot of agencies, especially DoD, definitely did not want to use GSA, maybe not even necessarily for the GSA schedules, not necessarily even use the GSA schedules. It was a real problem. So there's been this pendulum going back and forth, with respect to whether to centralize procurement and GSA. Generally speaking, the agencies have revolted and said no. I think this is a new day. I think that the agencies are much more in line with administration policy. I think, and unlike the first Trump administration, I think this Trump administration has much better alignment of all the departments, and they're all singing off the same sheet of music. And I think these executive orders are sending powerful messages to the agencies. This is the way the president wants. These are his priorities. This is what he wants. Interesting, too, with these executive orders, Chris. The president has issued over 200 executive orders. 60 of them touch upon acquisition. 4 of them directly address acquisition. One of them being the executive order to say, hey, I want to consolidate the purchase of common goods and services at GSA. I think that sends a very strong message. We've never had executive orders of this magnitude. Actually, I don't remember executive orders on procurement. People are like, procurement, who cares, right? And so this is sort of exciting if you're in my world or our world, to see a president who's actually laser focused on procurement and improving the procurement process. And the theory is, if they consolidate procurement at GSA for common goods and services, not things that are unique to an agency, obviously, it will be more efficient, cost effective. I think what we're going to see in the next couple of years will be more usage of the GSA schedules and more usage of government-wide contract vehicles that are housed at GSA. And that is going to be interesting to watch. For example, Chris, they're talking right now about moving NASA SOUP, a very successful government-wide contract vehicle, move that government-wide vehicle to GSA. Wow. If that happens, like back when I was at the Office of Federal Procurement Policy at the White House, that would have been unheard of. NASA would have screamed and yelled and said, no way are we moving NASA SOUP to GSA. I think it's different today, and it won't happen until after these contract awards on what's called SOUP 6, until that's actually complete, probably April, May timeframe. Well, everything's delayed now because of the shutdown. But if NASA SOUP goes to GSA, which they say it will, in sometime next year, then that will be huge. That will basically say, you know what, it is different. The times have changed. We are going to see more consolidation at GSA.
So on that topic in particular, I was an active user of the NASA SOUP program while I was a GSA employee. It had incredible benefits relative to some of the established GSA GWACs and Schedule 70, because they had the ability to add a product. They could quickly do mods. Like there was a user benefit to use the SOUP program versus using some of the in-house vehicles at GSA. Uh-huh. And I've been very public about the argument that if you do move it inside of GSA, it'll probably be successful for the rest of its current natural life. But the nature of GSA is it's really hard to pick a number of businesses and make them winners and not have who's ever the next in line complain about a limited number of awards. So I don't know how many awardees are on SOUP 4, SOUP 5, SOUP 6, but like GSA vehicles, the number of awards get wider and wider. It's always more because it's it's America's buyer. It's got to have the marketplace for everybody, and a fast lane, like a group of winners always expands if it's inside of GSA. So I think like the nature of moving it is very risky to its success.
Well, GSOs don't have enough people, unless they move all the NASA employees over, which maybe they'll do, and rebadge them. But this is one of the challenges GSA has right now, Chris. They don't have the number of people necessary to handle some of these agency procurements. We're talking about movement of other procurements over to GSA. And that I'm sure you're aware of this new, don't you love acronyms? The government's got to have an acronym, right? So we got OCAS now. We got the Office of Centralized Acquisition Services. It's like, well, what the heck is that? A new office at GSA called OCAS. Well, the vision is that this new office at GSA will handle procurements for smaller agencies in particular. So they've already moved SBA over, OPM, HUD. Well, HUD's not that small, actually. And the idea is, well, let's just try it out. Let's see how this works. We will handle the procurements for GSA will handle the procurements for SBA, HUD, OPM. But they didn't bring the people. The people didn't come over, just the work. So I think GSA is like, well, we definitely need to get the people. We're going to have to increase the size of this office dramatically in order to do the procurements for all these different agencies. I think there are more agencies to come, Chris. It will be really interesting to see how this works. So, for example, SBA, they stripped the office, they closed the procurement office, but they left like a senior procurement executive, somebody with warrant authority, who could do a quick procurement for the administrator if she needed it or something of that nature. But basically, the procurement function at SBA is at GSA in this new office. How is it? Well, we'll see, right? We will see probably a year from now. We'll have a better feel for how is this really working.
If we're measuring in terms of years, I'm going to take, it's not going to be working well at a year. It's going to be several yething new inside of government takes a while to get its footing. Just the resourcing, the technology environment, just like, where are the files? Who knows anything about this one project? Like, it's just hard. And to do that in the middle of an era where there are declining resources, it's probably long-term the right answer to do OCAS, but you would have to resource it incredibly well to be successful in the short term.
Right. I think that's right. And your old office, you remember your old office, the Office of Assistant Acquisition Service Programs, they did not close that office at GSA. That office is still up and running. And people are confused. Well, how's that different from OCAS? But as I understand it, and obviously that office at GSA handles really very complex procurements and one-offs, if you will, where an agency's like, I need help. I need help in doing a particular large-scale procurement.
Yeah, they probably could take a note from NASA Soup and come up with better branding so the names are clear. OCAS versus AS. The soup bowl and the duck is a little bit more effective than OCAS.
It's really confusing too, like the distinction between your old office and OCAS. People.
Let me add a new acronym then, one that's a little better branding. OneGov. There's also this new OneGov initiative.
Oh wow, and that's serious stuff. Okay, the OneGov is serious stuff here. Not that the other's not, but we're talking big bucks with OneGov. So GSA is sort of related, right? It's related to the consolidation movement, like everything should be at GSA. So OneGov is, and we're going to speak with one voice to industry on big software. Right now it's just software products. GSA, we're going to sit down and we're going to negotiate with OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, the big guys, Google, software, Microsoft, all these big guys. We're going to call them in. We're going to negotiate. And they've done it. They have entered into pricing arrangements with some of these big software developers. And the theory is they've saved a lot of money. It looks on paper, it looks like they have had major discounts in pricing. The only thing is they're short-term in nature. Most all of the agreements are very short-term. Some are already... I think some are already up. So where does this go? I think what the important thing to look at, Chris, is the administration really wants direct communication with the OEMs. They want the OEMs to be the prime contractors and these resellers who historically have done work for all the OEMs and in effect have protected the OEMs because the OEMs don't really want to take on a lot of the risk to be a prime government contractor and all the compliance requirements. So they have this army of resellers who go out and actually enter into the contracts with the government. And the interesting thing, Chris, too, on these OneGov pricing agreements, the resellers are the ones that are going to be implementing these agreements. It's not the OEMs. And so the actual contractual relationship is still with the resellers. Now, the administration is not wild about this. The administration really is skeptical about these resellers. and they have the feeling that these resellers charge too much with respect to their profit, their markup, generally speaking. And they're suspicious that resellers have taken advantage of the government. I don't know that there's any evidence to show that, but there are rumors that GSA and DoD together are very close to issuing a memo that will actually put a cap on the markup. And I heard it could be as low as or high as, depending on how you look at it, 5%. This would be revolutionary in nature. I mean, I don't think we've ever had anything like this where for commercial contracting, we're talking about commercial contracting, Chris, that the government has actually put a cap on profit or markup. In other words, we're not paying any more for your overhead and profit than 5% or whatever percentage we come up with. That would be new and different. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but it does highlight the desire of the administration to have direct communication and negotiation with the OEMs, and they're questioning the value of the resellers. No question about that.
I want to pick at something that I'm not sure anybody who's new who comes in as a political appointee to GSA or the government, or you're the normal 1102 as a contracting officer in the government, where this distinction occurs between like, I want to do business directly with Google or Microsoft or Salesforce or whoever, like, big company name, and that company actually doesn't want to deal directly with the government. Like you mentioned, the compliance and the complexity of it, and they choose to use this third party, this value-added reseller. What's the mindset of the OEM that's trying? What's the risk they're trying to avoid by not dealing directly with the government? Because new people who show up, they don't understand why this other market exists.
Yeah, interesting. Well, this goes to the whole, and it's the same time the administration wants to attract innovative, new small businesses. They want to attract people to the government and get them in the marketplace. And it's the same bugaboo that we've had for years. There are a couple of things where large companies and small, quite frankly, don't want to deal with the government. One is the cost accounting standards. The cost accounting standards are in major need of reform. They are a huge barrier to entry into the federal marketplace. Enormous special requirements that only apply to federal work, not commercial work. TINA, the Truth in Negotiations Act, again, enormous compliance burdens arriving out of that law with respect to disclosures of pricing and so forth to the government. And intellectual property, Chris, intellectual property rights. The intellectual property rights, the government tries to take intellectual property rights from the contractors in an aggressive way, quite frankly. And a lot of contractors like, forget it. You do not operate as a commercial type entity. You have all these special rules that we don't want to deal with. And so the resellers, to the credit, they know how to deal with it. They've got it down. They know how to comply with all of these different requirements, and it's costly. It's very costly. And so, the resellers do charge for all of that work they do as far as compliance, and they do integration work, right? They take a lot of different software programs and integrate them. They really are value added. I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions to every rule, but bottom line is, and I don't know if GSA fully appreciates at this point exactly what resellers do. I mean, it's not a pass-through arrangement. And there is a view that, at least for IT resellers, I should distinguish that from maybe others, but as far as IT resellers, there really is a value add to what they do. And I don't think most of the OEMs want to take on that burden. They don't want to incur the costs. And guess what? If, in fact, you force the OEMs to have direct relationships with the government, their prices will go up. And probably some of the OEMs say dramatically so.
Yeah, I think part of it is also just an ordinary definition problem where we use the word commercial, but when we say the word commercial, we mean like three different things. We're using the Google example. I'm talking to you through a Google Chrome, browser right now. But when I use that in the government, it's not like the purest version of that commercial. It's a modified version of the commercial that complies with the government's rules. And then there's like levels of commerciality. And I think that the government doesn't realize the complexity it imposes on commercial firms that then forces them to go interact with this intermediary to make sure they're in compliance.
I think that's really good. And that's not necessarily just software either.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, Chris. on this OneGov initiative, the software products, that's just the initial salvo. That's just the initial. GSA plans to go to services. They plan to use the OneGov philosophy in the direct negotiation with OEMs or prime large companies. They plan to go to services eventually. Now, whether they do or not, I don't know. But the plan is to expand this OneGov initiative beyond just software products and move into services, which obviously would be a huge pivot.
Well, job security for you and me.
They've done 12 of these. I think it's at least 12, Chris. I think there have been at least 12 since April. That's a lot. Just in the last 6 months, you've had 12 of these OneGov pricing arrangements.
Yeah. I think the hard part in order to be truly successful, though, you get a discount off of the GSA schedule for this software product, but you need the government to then act as a single buyer. You need to actually take all of the requirements, and maybe it's a distinction between like civilian agencies with similar infrastructures and different DoD, like 4 or 5 major buys of this one software to get the volume discount. And that's not the way that money flows today.
Right.
Well, if money flows, it goes to the agency, and the agency they'd have to like team up. It's like everybody sitting at a dinner and who's going to put out their credit card. The credit card right now is 12 different credit cards. It's not one person saying, I got the check. So they'd have to change the nature of the money in order to make it successful.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. Fascinating.
All right, let's move on. We're going to move on to the RFO, the Revolutionary FAR Overhaul. In several agencies, it is live today. The deviations have been issued. And so you used to be in a seat where you could have made subtle tweaks to the rules, but now we're seeing bigger tweaks to the rules than we've ever seen. So my question for you is, what are your thoughts on what they did? And then I have some follow-ups.
Well, Chris, I've been impressed, to tell you the truth. I mean, I think what GSA has done on this is very impressive. I don't know if it's revolutionary, and maybe that word revolutionary increased expectations like, oh, wow, we're going to end up with a FAR that's only 100 pages. Right now, it's over 2,000 pages. Wow. Although, okay, here's some stats. Okay, this is really interesting. And some people might think this is revolutionary. They have, these are stats I got from GSA. They've removed 600 pages of the FAR. That's not bad. It's over 2,000. I mean, that's like almost a third, almost a third. I don't know. That's a big chunk. 175,000 words have been removed from the FAR. 1,200, now this may be the most important statistic, 1,200 directives, in other words, sentences that use the word shall, you shall do this, you shall do that, have been removed. Now, they may have been they may have used a different word like may. In other words, they're no longer 1,200 shalls. Now, you know what that means for lawyers, right? This isn't good news for lawyers because lawyers like these requirements and then find out, where did the government fail to follow its own procedures and the requirements that were mandatory. What they're doing with this FAR rewrite is reducing the number of mandatory requirements. That is huge. And also, and again, to their credit, for decades, we've said commercial contracting, the government should be more like the commercial world. It should use commercial techniques. It should simplify its procurement process. In FAR Part 12, which deals with commercial procurement, which became somewhat of a joke, quite frankly, over the last 20, 30 years, the number of mandatory FAR clauses increased dramatically in FAR Part 12. It was like, wait a minute, you're not supposed to have all these mandatory FAR clauses. It was supposed to be more commercial, like we just negotiate, we don't have all of these mandatory requirements. They increased dramatically. During this FAR rewrite, what they've done on FAR Part 12, commercial item procurements, they've taken out like a third of the mandatory FAR flow down clauses. That's huge. That's great news. Should they've done more? Arguably. But that's a huge start, right? A huge start taking out a lot of these mandatory FAR clauses out of FAR Part 12. I think all of that is really good news, and I don't know that anyone's really highlighted the benefits. A lot of people going, wow, wait a minute, we don't see, the FAR's not down to 100 pages, and they had made some comment that they were going to try to reduce it maybe even all the way down to 100 pages. It's just not going to happen, right? Because a lot of this stuff is statutory. So, Chris, that's where if we're going to see a revolution, it would be with Congress, because a lot of the requirements in the FAR are statutory. So until you change the statutes, the FAR folks don't have much choice. They have to implement the statutes. And there's only I guess what I'm trying to say, you're only going to get the FAR down so much.
Yeah.
And then if you really want to reduce it, you got to get Congress to weigh in and get rid of some of all of these compliance burdens and reporting requirements and so forth that are imposed on government contractors. I think GSA, if you look at their website, the Revolutionary FAR Overhaul website, it's pretty impressive. They did a line in, a line out. They explain exactly what the major differences are. Now, a lot of people got confused, Chris, because they said, oh my goodness, they've taken out such and such provision. I can't believe they did that. Well, they did, and they moved it maybe to a different FAR part. So you have to, it's a little bit of a hunt and peck. Some of the provisions were not eliminated. They were merely moved to a different FAR part. So there was a lot of consolidation, housekeeping. They cleaned up a lot of duplicative provisions. And it did, some folks had trouble following it and thought, oh my gosh, they took out some things we'd rather they not take out. But no, some of it's still there. And but revolutionary, maybe not, but significant, definitely so. Definitely, we've never had this type of really concerted effort to make the FAR more user-friendly and simple. And I think you've got to give them credit. I think they've done a great job.
So I read it as a person who used to run an acquisition organization, and my initial take was like winners and losers. The winners of the RFO were the acquisition community. Flexibility of like the ability to do things more effectively. So I see fingerprints from like Jeff Kosis, the GSA SPE, saying, I'm doing this for my workforce to make them more successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, the lawyers, right? The lawyers are going, oh my gosh, you're getting rid of all these shalls. We don't like that. And you're giving more discretion. Now, the problem with giving so much discretion to contracting officers, you arguably will have inconsistency among contracting officers at the various agencies, arguably.
Yeah. And so that's where I was going to go for you. Your first read, winners and losers in terms of industry response. Is this good for the lawyers? Is this bad? Is this good for small business? Is it bad? Like, what's your initial take on like how this is going to impact, the protest landscape or small businesses in general?
Yeah, well, small businesses have been. I don't think it's the FAR rewrite that has hit small businesses, or really. I'll talk a little bit about. There was a lot of concern that the FAR rewrite was going to somehow hurt small businesses, and that small businesses were going to, for example, the rule of two. The rule of two, where if you have two or more small businesses that are qualified to do the work, you have to set aside the procurement for small business. A lot of people were like, oh my goodness, that rule of two is only statutory from the micro purchase up to the simplified acquisition threshold. It is regulatory above the simplified acquisition threshold. At least that's the way it was. And a lot of people thought, the GSA will probably kill the rule of two for everything above the simplified acquisition threshold. That's not a statutory requirement. Wrong. GSA kept the rule of two. They basically merged the language all together, saying, hey, rule of two applies to anything above the micro purchase threshold. Very clear, rule of two applies. So that means that we have set-asides. We have the set-asides are here to stay. The administration has embraced them. If you look at the new GSA administrator, he just had his confirmation hearing 2 weeks ago, I believe. He said he had 4 priorities. One of the 4 priorities, attract new small businesses to the federal marketplace. He's really focused on small business. I mean, I think that's very positive. Where they've been hurt, where the small businesses have been hurt, obviously, were these contract cancellations, which really have nothing to do with the FAR rewrite. And they hit it. They took a pretty large toll. Every demographic was hit with respect to the contract cancellation. Small businesses as a whole were hurt very badly. And so you will see more protests coming from small businesses. You do see that because of these contract cancellations. And that's one reason you're seeing the AI usage and the small businesses running with AI and filing their protests. I think all that's going to level out. And I think generally in the future, you're going to have fewer bid protests because there's more discretion for the contracting officer, and for lawyers to challenge a discretionary decision by a contracting officer is really hard to do. Very hard to do. And you really like to have very clear rules, like you shall do this or you did not do it and you were supposed to. Lawyers love the word shall. And basically, they've gotten rid of 1,200 shalls. So I think in the long run, this will reduce litigation. The big questions, Chris, now that these contracting officers have all this flexibility, are they really going to use it? For example, are they going to use non-FAR tools, which they have been able to use for years? This administration, I think, is encouraging the usage of non-FAR contracting tools, such as other transactions that would be non-FAR based. Are they going to do that? Are they going to feel more emboldened to do that? Or are they going to go, hey, I'm used to doing it one way, I'm going to do it the same old way, I've done it for 20 years. That remains to be seen, to what extent these contracting officers will embrace the discretion they're being given.
I haven't been a federal employee for 7 months, but I could speak on behalf of all federal employees today, they do not feel emboldened. maybe in a year, maybe in a couple of years, but like having all of access to all of the new flexibilities, it is an environment where like there is not aligned trust, and we're gonna take some risks.
Right, yeah. Well, that brings us, Chris, to what's next with this FAR rewrite, the revolution of the RFO. None of this stuff that you and I are talking about really is effective, except in a limited way. What the administration is doing is they're using, now this is revolutionary. Deviations have not been used this way ever. There are massive amounts of deviations, right? They're doing, and they want these things to be immediate. With respect to the changes of in the FAR, they want these changes to be immediate. Well, they are at GSA. GSA has done the deviations and they're effective. But guess what? Not all agencies have issued deviations, including the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense has been somewhat on the sidelines, waiting to see what happens. Right now, it's business as usual. The DFAR, the FAR, nothing's really changed at DOD. And that, let's face it, they spend a lot of money. GSA, yes, deviations were effective immediately. A lot of agencies, it's all over the place. You don't know what rules are in place. Now that's going to change, though, Chris. That's going to change very quickly here. They've done the FAR rewrite. They're done with GSA's done with its deviations. The next step will be interim rules. They will go out, and we'll use an interim rule because all of this emanates from the president's executive order. And generally speaking, the FAR Council uses interim rules to implement a president's executive order. So you'll see interim rules. Now, everything's delayed because of the shutdown, and I think they wanted to get them out by the end of the year. I don't think that's going to happen. But these interim rules will go out probably in January. And I understand they're going to go with a very short public comment period, maybe only 30-day comment period. And then you'll have the final rule. But interim rule, you know what that means. It means it is effective immediately, pending finalization after public comment. So all of this that we're talking about is going to be effective in 2026. So it's coming. It's coming soon.
There, I saw today, GSA, DHS, and USDA have issued their deviations, so they can start living in the new world. One of the areas that jumps out at me, and this will be like get your take on it. FAR Part 15 has some substantive changes in like the definition of like whether or not you're conducting discussions when they used to have the word clarifications. So like the ability to communicate and, maybe understand something further. Do you think that that's going to be the main area, the avenue for protest, is whether or not you did or didn't discover more in Part 15, or do you think it's still going to play out the way that it is today and then it comes out in discovery during a protest?
Well, this is an interesting point you're raising. So FAR Part 15 discussions, that was the fertile area for bid protests. You didn't follow the rules. You didn't do the discussion correctly. You didn't put everybody in the group that the discussion should have had. They basically, FAR 15, they basically did away with discussions. And they now have, we've always had clarifications, and clarifications are still there in FAR Part 15. But now you can have negotiated clarification. So I can say, hey, Chris, I'm not really sure you have 5 years of experience, and you've got to have 5 years of experience to be the program manager on this contract. And you're out of here, if you don't have a program manager with 5 years. You and I can discuss it. We can, I'm going to call you for clarification. And then maybe we negotiate something and say, well, maybe that does count for your 5 years of experience. Oh, okay, I didn't understand that. Oh, okay. Even though you don't say it, you have it, right? You got it. Okay, so you've clarified that for me. And we had this private discussion or clarification. And all of a sudden, that's really great. They're more commercial-like. They are making FAR Part 15 more commercial-like with respect to clarification and negotiated clarifications and talking more directly with each vendor. But this is what people don't like. They don't like that kind of flexibility. I mean, it's especially lawyers. It's like, wow, we want very clear rules. None of this behind-the-scenes negotiated clarification. What is that? They liked all the rules with respect to discussions because it was black and white. You'd either follow the rules, you didn't follow the rules. You didn't follow the rules. There's a lot more flexibility now in FAR Part 15, and you don't have these structured discussions anymore, where if I talk to you, I got to talk to everybody, okay? If I talk to you, I got to talk to everyone else. That's really not the case now. So I think there'll be fewer protests in this whole area because the government has flexibility and discretion, and it's very hard to challenge discretion.
So the previous rule was, obviously, you talk to one, you got to talk to all. And if you get something revised, then you're in discussions. Like you get a new piece of paper, then you're fixing it. The new way is I can talk to you and I can find out what you actually meant by it. And I don't need to talk to the others. And you know what protest we'll receive as a result of it? You should have called me and asked me about something you didn't understand. And because you didn't follow the intent of the rules. I've been on the receiving end of the company made a mistake. We didn't let them fix it. And then they protest saying, you had a duty to let me fix it. Like it's in almost every protest that I've received is that you should have conducted discussions and then help me fix my proposal as one of like the 4 arguments in every proposal.
Interesting.
Protest.
So you're saying that the new line of argument will be you should have called me for a clarification.
Yep.
Interesting. Hey, maybe you're right. Huh. Don't you worry. Lawyers will figure out some way to file a protest.
Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, with the change in the way that the money has flowed this year, there will be protests that are just incumbent, revenue protests by their very nature. Like companies have to stay in business. So even if there's not really a reason to protest the new thing, you find a reason in order to just keep, people on jobs, keeping livelihoods going forward. So the era of protests sometimes doesn't really apply to the rules, just applies to the nature of math.
Yeah. Interesting. It will be interesting to watch. Well, in the next couple of years, will protests start going up? Because there has been a trend line since 2016, really for the last 10 years, a steady decline in bid protests.
Yeah, I've always thought it's tied to the total, like the federal budget. Like if it's flat, protests kind of decline. If we go up or if they go down, that's where you see changes, like, to whether or not companies are winning.
And we didn't talk about, Chris, but these, we didn't talk about debriefings when we were talking about protests. I've been a big advocate of oral debriefings where you tell me, why did I lose? Tell me exactly why I lost. I've had clients before where they have filed protests because they couldn't figure out why the government didn't award the contract to them. And they get these, and this is true with respect to this GSA schedules, all that's required is called a brief explanation. I don't even need to give you a debriefing if it's a GSA schedule loss that you're protesting, or if it's a GSA schedule buy. I don't need to give you a debriefing. I just give you a brief explanation. And you know what, Chris? Some of those explanations are you lost, all right? And he won. So sorry. Thanks for your interest in government procurement. People get really annoyed when they spend sometimes $1 million or more putting together a proposal. A lot of work goes into these proposals. And then for the government just to say, we're not even going to give you any feedback with respect to why you lost. So we've had clients actually have to file protests to find out why they lost. And then once they find out, and oftentimes they drop the protest. And Department of Defense, let's give them credit where credit's due. The Department of Defense is now using debriefings, and oftentimes oral debriefings, much more aggressively, and their protests have definitely declined. I do believe there's a correlation between the number of debriefings you give, true debriefings, not a brief explanation, true debriefings about where your strengths and weaknesses were. I think that if the government embraces debriefings more so than they currently are, you will see protests go down fairly significantly, I believe.
I have a unique perspective on this from my previous role, and there's a nuance here that I want to make sure that I stress. There's a dollar amount associated with whether or not you should be providing an oral debriefing. And many of the programs that I used to administer were over $1 billion. At $1 billion, wow, you receive a written full record, the administrative record of, the expanded debriefing. You get the evaluation report effectively on every one of the largest ones that work used to be conducted out of my office. And I listened to OFPP and the PIL and everyone telling me that I needed to do oral debriefings. I've sat in the room across the major defense contractors and given them an oral debriefing. And I can tell you, it is the least satisfying experience of anyone's career. It's by comparison, it's like going on like Survivor or Love is Blind or The Dating Show or whatever it is, and telling number two why you didn't love them. There is no conversation you can ever have with the world's largest defense company saying, we think the other company is slightly better, and it go well. So the largest procurements, it has absolutely chilled the idea of an oral debriefing to the written administrative record, because we know there's the possibility of litigation. And so complying with the process and the rules, you get written at the top end of the market versus an oral debriefing. In the middle, it's totally fine to do an oral, but at the top, you've got lawyers saying, let's just give them the facts.
But that's good too, though, right? I mean, even a written, you did give them a written debriefing.
Yeah.
Well, that's good too. I mean, my point is my experience has been orals sometimes. Well, sometimes it depends really who's on the other side of the table, right? It really depends on who's on the other side of the table. But bottom line is, whether it's oral or written, I think it's really important to give a debriefing as opposed to a brief explanation.
Yeah.
And of course, the government, it's a challenge because of proprietary information and so forth. You can't give a whole bunch of information on the winner. You pretty much have to just focus on the loser, whoever you're meeting with. You can't give out other people's proprietary data. So that obviously is a problem because you can't tell them everything with respect to their competitors, which makes it a bit of a challenge. I have a general view that communication's good. Generally speaking, more communication that is good. I think it's good for the whole system. And this is a challenge, right? The industry gets so frustrated with the lack of communication, not just on debriefings. The lack of communication is just astounding. And it got worse during COVID. It's not too good right now during the shutdown. And the industry gets incredibly frustrated by the lack of communication. And that differs from the commercial world, because I've seen the commercial world, right? And geez, the commercial world's very different. There's a lot of communication.
Well, we have covered our 3 different topic areas, and we have run close to an hour. So really good stuff. It is time to wrap up. So I have just closing thought. What's your main advice for companies that are in the GovCon space for the next couple of months? What should they be focusing on?
I think it is developing relationships and trying, and it's very frustrating, but trying to get out there and trying to talk to people, let them know what your capabilities are and so forth. The government spends a lot of money. The government will continue to spend a lot of money. And so I think, and you do have an administration, at least on paper, that says we love small business. We want to have more people enter the industrial base. They have a problem, and not just small businesses, but large businesses do not want to do business with the federal government. And the industrial base has declined dramatically over the last 20 years as far as people dealing with the federal government. Fewer contractors. And so that's good in one way, less competition. But I think it's bad for the taxpayer, dramatically bad, to have such a small industrial base. That's not good. It's not good for national security or anything else. So I think I would encourage companies, because there is an appetite to have new companies enter the federal market space. I think new companies should seriously look at it. And I do believe that the revolutionary FAR overhaul will simplify the rules, at least to some extent, more so than in the past. And maybe we'll get some statutory changes too that will be revolutionary in nature, that will take a year or two. But I think there's a bright future for federal procurement ahead.
And if you want more tips, you can find Rob at the W on the Overlook to be able to discuss the future of government acquisition. So with that wraps up this episode. Look forward to seeing you guys in a couple of weeks.
Chris, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
And that wraps up this episode of the Optimize podcast. A big shout out to our amazing host, Chris Hamm, and our guest, Rob Burton. Optimize is brought to you by VisibleThread, the RFP software for analyzing solicitations and contracts, and for creating and editing proposals. VisibleThread is used by 11 of the top 15 US government contractors. For more information, visit VisibleThread.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you are listening. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions on the Optimize podcast.